We have already discussed the meaning of the contract several times and established that it represents a limited form of freedom. It is an interesting example of the objective nature of relationships in society, since the conclusion of a contract is in itself a recognition of the other as a legal person. The reality of the contract, objectively speaking, recognizes the personhood of the other party. Psychological and economic motives are not relevant. The reason why one enters into a contract is not the main issue, what matters is its objective existence. Let us now consider the transition between contract and what Hegel calls injustice. In a contract there is an agreement between two personal wills, but not between the entire will of both parties. Each party retains a particularity in addition to the general will expressed in the contract. There is no true, complete or concrete universality, but what Hegel calls a commonality. A true universality would be a complete unity between the universality and the particular. However, the contract makes abstraction of the details of the persons, such as their intentions behind the contract. The commonality serves non-identical interests and does not create unity between these special interests. Therefore, Hegel states that the contract is based on arbitrariness. It depends on the parties involved, and in the contract they only commit themselves to the extent that it suits them, based on their special intentions. The universality of the contract is not pursued for its own sake, but is a means to the particular. This limitation of the contract is also evident in reality. Contracts are concluded, but also disputed and violated. In injustice, in crime, the limitations of the contract and the whole sphere of abstract law become clear in a real way. This is evident from two special comments that Hegel makes. In the remark on paragraph 75 of the Outlines of the Philosophy of Right, Hegel discusses marriage and the state. He polemics with older philosophers such as Kant, Rousseau, Locke, and Hobbes, who regard the contract as the foundation for both marriage and the state. According to Hegel, this is unjustified. Marriage and state belong to a higher sphere of law, namely social ethics or morality. Hegel's rejection of contract as the basis for marriage and the state stems from his belief that the state cannot rely on arbitrariness. And that is also valid for marriage. The state is not simply a sum of individual acts of will, it transcends mere material goods and needs. A state based on individual will or needs could not maintain itself. This also applies to the contract. Both a contract-based state and the contract itself perish. This downfall is due to the abstract nature of the contract, which expresses only part of the individual will and does not realize universality. Both parties to a contract see its contents as a means to satisfy their needs, but these needs remain private and distinct. For example, in a purchase and transfer contract, one person has an interest in receiving money, while the other has an interest in obtaining an object. Although the contract recognizes the other person as a legal entity, my will is not the same as that of my contractual partner. They may even be opposite, bringing with them the possibility of injustice and crime. It is possible to refuse the contract or to violate the rules in the form of injustice after its conclusion. I may pay you, but don't receive what I bought, so the possibility of crime arises. This transition between contract and injustice is not accidental, but logically necessary. In injustice, what remains implicit in the contract becomes explicit. Commonality is based on arbitrariness. If one of the parties no longer wishes this commonality, the contract expires. The particular now separates itself from the general. My individual will withdraws from the collective will of the contract, revealing that my will was always arbitrary. My will is not normalized by the contract from within, but the agreement is accidental and not truly guaranteed. In injustice, my individual will is opposed to the universal. It can be said that in injustice the particular revolts against the universality. For example, my own vision of my needs rebels against what I have stated in the contract. It may turn out that the amount I have to pay to acquire an asset far exceeds my available resources. Instead of accepting blame, I may decide to ignore or even violate the contract. The special need and interest belong to free will, which after all must be concrete. But in injustice it reveals something that is essential for justice. Against the universality, it appears that the contract is not able to reconcile my particularity with that of the other. The commonality is insufficient to bring about the universality of living together. This is the tragedy of injustice. However, the particular cannot stand against the commonality. There will be a reaction from society against my breaking the contract, which will be explicit in the punishment. Hegel understands punishment as a restoration of justice, the negation of its negation. How can we speak positively about this dialectical relationship between my particular existence, the commonality in the contract, and the generality that actually underlies it? Can we understand this better now? It can no longer be expressed solely in terms of abstract law. Our perspective must change, and morality comes into the picture. Morality shows the need to reconcile the particular with the universal. I must not only think of my own needs when entering into a contract, but also realize that I am pursuing universality in an abstract way. I must not only exercise my arbitrariness in the contract, but also elevate myself to that universality in which I recognize universal and objective legal relationships. This is what morality does. I want my will to be determined by the commonality of the contract. This desire for my own will, defining myself as the one who has now willed this and is bound by it, belongs to the moral and ethical domain. We will look at this transition in more detail in a next contribution.